The door to the east gallery had been left ajar by accident, or perhaps by providence, and Mira Ashford was standing behind it with a candle she had not lit when she heard the man she had married 4 hours ago make a vow to another woman. She did not move. She had learned stillness the way other women learn embroidery, young, by necessity, in a house where being noticed was never safe. Her hands, which could sort a ledger's columns by touch in near darkness, which had steadied her through 12 years of being her uncle's unpaid clerk and her cousin's convenient poor relation, did not tremble. She noted this with distant precision, that her hands were steady, that her breathing was even, that the stone floor was cold through her slippers, and that the voice coming through the gap in the door was not raised. It never was. That was the first thing she had marked about Lord Edmund Ashford when she had been brought to stand before him 6 weeks ago and told the terms of the arrangement. He spoke quietly. She had thought it a symptom of arrogance then. She was beginning to understand it was something else entirely. She would think about this night for the rest of her life, turning it like a coin in her hands. But standing in the dark behind the gallery door, she did not yet know that. She only knew what she heard. The voice on the other side was a woman's, low, precise, shaped by the same drawing rooms that had shaped all the rest of them, though with a warmth that had always struck Mira as perfectly calibrated, like a fire set to exactly the temperature required. Cecily Vane. The name sat in Mira's chest like a swallowed stone. Her new husband's neighbor, his childhood companion, his acknowledged confidante, the woman whose name the servants had offered, without being asked, in that particular tone servants use when they believe themselves to be educating the new mistress on facts she will need. What Edmund Ashford said in reply was this: "I have never promised you what you believed I promised you. But I will promise you now, so you may hear it plainly and hold me to it. She will not be harmed by any of this. Whatever else happens, she will come through it whole." Mira heard every word. She had until Michaelmas, which was 23 days away. That was the deadline her uncle had named in the settlement documents she had copied herself, had been made to copy, her own handwriting sealing her own fate, before the Ashford estate would have clear title to the parcel of farmland her father had died defending in a dispute no solicitor had since been willing to untangle. 23 days for whatever this marriage was to become. 23 days to understand what she had walked into. She left the candle unlit on the ledge, turned, and walked back down the corridor. By the time she reached her room, she had decided 2 things. She would not leave, and she would find out what the vow meant before she broke under the weight of not knowing. She was gone by dawn only in the sense that she rose before the household and went to the library, where the estate's account books were kept in 3 decades of accumulated disorder. Because that was where, in Mira Ashford's experience, the truth always lived, not in what people said, but in what they wrote down and then forgot they had written. The library at Ashmore was exactly the kind of room that would have delighted Mira in different circumstances. Tall windows that threw morning light in long diagonals across the turkey carpet, shelves that held not merely decoration, but an honest working collection, and a desk by the east window where someone had evidently done actual thinking, judging by the ink stains ground into the wood. She was standing at that desk with the 3rd volume of the household accounts open before her when the door opened and her husband came in. He stopped when he saw her. He was already dressed, which meant he too had not slept, or had slept briefly and badly. His coat was plain, his hands not idle. He was carrying a folded letter, and she noted without meaning to that his hands were a working man's hands, scarred at the knuckles in a way that did not come from the usual aristocratic recreations. She had noted this at the wedding breakfast and filed it without knowing why. They looked at one another across the room. "I did not expect to find you here," he said at last. "I imagine not." She did not look up from the account book. "I find the ledgers for the home farm go back only as far as the current steward's tenure. Were the earlier volumes relocated or destroyed?" A pause. She could feel him recalibrating. "Relocated. There is a room off the bailiff's office. I will have them brought up if you wish." She did wish. She said so and turned a page. She heard him cross the room and stop at the opposite side of the desk. "Lady Ashford." He said it carefully, as though testing the weight of the title against her. "May I ask what you are looking for?" She looked up then. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before, not the grave reserve he had worn throughout the negotiations and the ceremony, but something more alert, a quality of attention that she associated with people who were used to managing hidden information and were recalibrating how much she already knew. "Discrepancies," she said. "I keep accounts. It was my function in my uncle's house for 11 years. I am very good at it." She let a moment pass. "Your ledgers have discrepancies." He said, "What sort?" "The sort that accumulate slowly," she said, "and look like nothing until you lay 3 years of quarterly figures beside each other and notice that certain expenditures appear in different columns each time they recur, as though whoever records them does not wish them compared." She kept her voice pleasant and entirely without accusation, which was a skill she had also learned young. She pushed the volume toward him. Here and here. And again here. He looked. She watched his face. He was very still, the stillness of a man absorbing a blow without letting his face report it, and then he raised his eyes to hers, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something in them that was not controlled. It lasted approximately 3 seconds before he shuttered it. "How long," he asked quietly, "would it take you to check all of it? All 3 decades?" He did not flinch, however far back it goes. She considered. 3 days if I work without interruption. 2 if someone competent carries the books. He nodded once. Then his jaw set in the way she would come to recognize as decision made and filed. "I will arrange it." "And Lady Ashford." He paused with his hand on the letter, and she had the precise sense of a man choosing his next words from a very small selection. "I owe you an explanation of what you have walked into. I cannot give you all of it yet. There is a thing I cannot lay before you until I know whether my suspicion is correct. But I will tell you this much. The arrangement your uncle proposed and I accepted was not for the reason he told you." She met his eyes. He did not look away. "And the reason you accepted it," she said, "was not indifference." "No," he said. "It was not." A knock at the door broke the sentence in 2. A footman entered with the Morning Post, apologized, and withdrew. The moment sealed itself over like water over a stone. She turned back to the ledger. "Send me the earlier volumes," she said, "and perhaps breakfast. I find I work better with tea." He left. She looked at the door for a long time after he had gone, and then she looked at her hands, which were still not trembling, and she thought, "There is something buried here, and I am going to find it, and then I will know what his vow meant, and then I can decide what I am." The someone who had been falsifying the channel through which truth traveled in this house was a man named Dorian Vane. She did not know this yet. She learned it in pieces, the way you learn the architecture of a dark room. First a wall, then a corner, then a door you did not expect. Dorian was Cecily's brother, Edmund's steward of 7 years, and the most beautiful person in any room he entered, with that specific beauty that carries its own authority, the kind that makes people assume competence before it has been demonstrated. He managed the Ashmore estate with a thoroughness that all who dealt with him found impeccable. He was also, Mira had discovered by the end of her third day in the library, in the process of slowly, systematically, and with considerable ingenuity, stealing it. Not stealing directly, nothing so crude. The method was documentation, a farm income recorded at 4/5 its actual figure, the remainder routed through a secondary account designated for repairs that never took place, then drawn against in amounts small enough to resist notice if one checked only a single year, large enough to represent, across 6 years of careful iteration, a sum that would have bought 3 of the farms it was drawn from. The technique required a steady hand and a very good memory for which lie had been told in which column and which year. It was, Mira reflected, setting the 9th volume beside the 8th with a soft, deliberate click, actually quite elegant. Professionally speaking. She was still sitting with this knowledge, arranging it in her mind, when Dorian Vane himself appeared in the library doorway. He was smiling, which she already understood was his default condition. He smiled the way a house is lit for a party, entirely for the effect it had on those looking at it. "Lady Ashford, I am glad to find you settling in so comfortably." He glanced at the volumes spread across the desk with an expression of easy amusement. "The old accounts. Edmund always threatens to have them organized and never manages it. Do you find them useful?" "Very," she said. She closed the volume she was holding. She did not offer him what she had found. She had learned this too, young. Never lay your whole hand on the table when you do not know the other player's cards. He crossed to the desk with that particular ease of someone who has moved through this space for years and considers it partly his own, and she noted for later use that he did not look at the books. He looked at her face. "I hope you find Ashmore to your liking," he said. "Edmund, Lord Ashford, can seem cold on first acquaintance. He has been a long time grieving." He pulled a chair close and sat without being invited. In confidence, he touched his cravat, a quick light adjustment she would later learn to read as the thing he did when he was managing his expression. "I worried, when he agreed to your uncle's proposal. A man in his state can make arrangements he will regret when he comes back to himself. I am glad to see he has been attentive." She did not say any of this to Dorian Vane. "You are very kind to concern yourself," she said pleasantly. He smiled again. She noticed the smile did not reach his eyes, and then she noticed that she had seen this before, had seen him smile across the breakfast table with precisely this quality of light, and had filed it as reserve, as the formality of a man who did not know her yet. She revised this assessment now. The smile was not reserve. It was calculation wearing the costume of warmth. "I should let you work," he said, rising. He let his gaze travel across the open volumes one more time. "Ancient history, mostly. I shouldn't imagine anything there that casts new light on the present." He said it very gently. She understood that it was a warning. "No doubt you are right," she said, and looked back at her ledger. She heard his footsteps go. She sat very still until the sound had fully gone, and then she turned to the current volume, the one for the year they were in, and began to check it against the 2 that preceded it with a new and specific attention. She found the 4th discrepancy before supper. She found Cecily Vane in the garden the following morning, which she had expected, since Cecily had been arriving at Ashmore for morning calls, with a regularity that suggested the house was partly hers, in some understanding that predated Mira's own arrival. She was a handsome woman of 30, with dark hair and a quality of self-possession that Mira might have admired in other circumstances. She was also, Mira had decided, not the enemy. This was a conclusion she had arrived at by the same method she used for all conclusions, examining the available evidence without the interference of feeling. What she had heard through the gallery door had been a woman demanding a promise, What she had heard Edmund say was a promise about Mira. What those two facts together signified was not what the servants, with their educating tone, believed they signified. She was thinking about this while she walked toward the rose bed where Cecily stood. And so she was not attending as closely as she should have been, and she nearly missed what happened. Dorian Vane, who had come up behind his sister, laid one hand briefly on her arm, and Cecily's face changed. It was a small change, a flicker, the kind that would have been invisible to anyone who was not, by professional habit and long practice, watching faces for what they did not intend to show. Cecily's chin lifted a fraction of an inch, her fingers stilled on the rose stem she had been holding, and then she turned and greeted Mira with warmth that was, Mira thought, genuine. The difference between Cecily's warmth and her brother's was the difference between fire and a painting of fire, and she could feel it from 3 yards out. "Lady Ashford, I hope I am not intruding. Not at all." Mira reached her and stopped because she wanted to watch them both at once. She had a question she needed Cecily's face to answer, and she needed to ask it without asking it. She chose her words the way she chose figures, precisely. What a fine morning for it. "Your brother was telling me yesterday that old records rarely cast new light. I wonder if he is right. In my experience, the oldest documents are the most honest because they were written before anyone knew they would matter." Cecily's face was still. Her brother's face, in her peripheral vision, was smiling. "I imagine that depends on the documents," Cecily said after a moment. Indeed, Mira smiled back. She had learned to smile pleasantly at things she found alarming. This too was a skill from her uncle's house. "I have been finding the estate records quite illuminating." She paused one precise count. "I shall have to tell Lord Ashford what I have found. Perhaps this evening." Cecily said nothing. Dorian said, pleasantly, that he hoped she would not trouble Edmund with domestic details when he had so much else to occupy him. He said it very gently. It was the second warning. She thanked them both for their company and went inside. She found Edmund in the stables, which surprised her, though on reflection it should not have. Those hands, she thought, were not made by a man who stood in rooms all day. He was doing something practical with a harness and not looking like a lord at all, and she stood in the stable door for a moment, watching him without his knowledge, which was unusual for her since she was generally the one being watched without her knowledge in this house. "My lord," she said. He turned. He had a way of looking at her now that was different from the first days, less guarded, more as though he were trying to solve something. She found she did not mind it. "I need to speak with you privately," she said. "Not in the house." He set the harness down. His eyes went to the stable door, then back to her. He said, "Walk with me," then. They walked along the east field boundary, which was far from the house, and had, she had noted, no windows that commanded it. The Michaelmas deadline was 17 days away. She could feel it pressing at her back. She said, "I have found 6 years of systematic falsification in your estate accounts. I can demonstrate it fully with the documents. The method involves secondary accounting entries under a repairs designation that is never drawn against for actual repairs. I believe it has been ongoing since the current steward assumed his post, and I believe the total sum is considerable." He stopped walking. She stopped too and looked at him directly, because she needed to see his face for what came next. He said, "How certain are you?" "Entirely," she said. "I do not bring things to people unless I am entirely certain. It has always struck me as a waste of everyone's time." A moment passed. Then he turned and looked out over the field, and she saw in the set of his shoulders something that was not surprise, something more like grief, which told her a great deal. You already knew, she said. Not the particulars. But you suspected. He said, I have suspected for 8 months. I have not been able to prove it because the man who could have helped me, the previous steward, died in February and left no records I could find. I have spent 8 months looking for the missing ledgers and finding nothing. He paused. I did not tell you because I did not know you, and because I thought. He stopped. You thought I might tell someone, she said, or that I might not wish to know. Both, his jaw set, neither of which was fair to you. She considered this. A bee worked methodically through the clover at the field's edge, she said, the previous steward. What happened to his records? Edmund turned to look at her. His eyes were very dark and very steady. I was told they were destroyed in a fire at his cottage in March. A small fire. Nothing else was lost. She said, That would be convenient. Yes, he said. It would. She had thought about the locked room on the 2nd floor of the bailiff's office twice in the past 3 days and dismissed it on the grounds that she had no reason to ask about it. She now had a reason. That evening, Dorian Vane came to call and was admitted because there was as yet no cause to refuse him, and sat in the drawing room with the easy comfort of a man in a house where he has sat for years, and spoke to Edmund about estate matters with the fluency of a man who has given the same reports so many times they have become sincere. Mira sat with her needlepoint. She could not embroider, but she could hold the hoop convincingly, and listened to the quality of each silence. Cecily was not with her brother tonight. This was new. At a lull in the conversation, Mira said, still looking at her needlepoint, Mr. Vane, I wonder if you might show me the bailiff's accounts tomorrow morning. I have been working through the older volumes, and I would like to see how they connect with the current system. You would know the records better than anyone. A pause so brief that only a woman trained by years of strategic invisibility would have timed it. Of course, Dorian said, it would be my pleasure. She thanked him and returned to her needlepoint. She did not look at Edmund. She did not need to. She was certain he had looked at her, and the nature of that look she could reconstruct from its absence. After Dorian had gone, Edmund came and stood near the window where she sat. He did not speak immediately. She counted 12 seconds, which was long enough that she understood he was choosing words very carefully. I have a key, he said quietly, to a room in the bailiff's office. He held it out, and she looked at it resting in his working man's palm, an iron key, old, the sort that opens something that was not meant to be opened frequently. I have never used it. The previous steward gave it to me 2 days before he died and told me I would know when. She looked at the key. She looked at his face. She said, I think he may have meant now. He closed his fingers around it. He said, lower. If what is behind that door is what I believe it may be, it will not be pleasant for anyone, including you. I want you to understand that before we go any further. This is not, he paused, this is not only about the estate. I know, she said, it is about you, and about whatever you promised Cecily Vane through a gallery door on my wedding night. The silence that followed had a particular texture. She felt him go very still. How much did you hear? Enough, she said, to know it was not what the servants believe it was. Enough to know you were protecting someone. She kept her voice even. I have not yet determined who, he said. After a long time, it is Cecily I am trying to protect. From her own brother. He looked at the key in his hand. Dorian has been telling her for 2 years that I have been mismanaging this estate deliberately, running it into the ground, hiding debts, and that I agreed to your uncle's proposal because I needed the land settlement to cover losses I could not acknowledge. He has been feeding her the same figures, altered as proof. He stopped. and she heard in the stopping a fury so carefully contained it was barely audible, making use of her trust in him and of her old feeling for me as a mechanism to keep her from looking too closely at what he is actually doing. She considered this, because if she looked, she would see it, she said. Yes, she is not stupid. She sees clearly. He has simply arranged what she sees. Mira set down the needlepoint hoop, she said, and the vow you made her was that I would not be hurt by the unraveling of it. Yes, she said, that was not yours to promise alone. He looked at her then, directly and without the careful shuddering she had grown accustomed to, and she saw in his face what she suspected had been there for some time, and what she had not allowed herself to look for, something that was not arrangement, not convenience, not the cold arithmetic of settlement. She looked at it for one careful moment, and then looked away. Because 17 days was not enough time to be certain of anything, and she was a woman who did not bring things to people until she was entirely certain. A key, she said, opens a room. And it is the room I have been thinking about for 3 days. She stood. Shall we go and see what the previous steward left you? The room off the bailiff's office was small and smelled of dust and old iron and, faintly, of the lavender water that the late steward had apparently used, since a handkerchief with the scent still faintly in it lay folded on top of a crate of volumes that were immediately recognizable to Mira as the missing ledgers. They were not alone, however, beneath the ledgers, bound in leather and sealed with a separate lock. A small, precise padlock of the sort jewelers use was a journal, and beneath the journal, folded and folded again until it was the size of a playing card, was a letter addressed in a hand she did not recognize to Edmund, Lord Ashford, to be delivered when the time has come for the truth to stand. Edmund broke the seal. He read it standing in the candlelight while she held the light steady, because that was what was needed. And she watched his face while he read and saw in it, in sequence, confirmation, grief, and something that was the aftermath of a very long waiting. He said he saw it 3 years ago. He tried to confront Dorian directly and was threatened. He had a daughter, he says. He could not risk it, so he documented everything and locked it here and wrote to me, and he stopped. The letter never reached me. Because Dorian manages the post, she said. Yes, she held the candle closer. There is a second document, she said, behind the journal. He drew it out. It was not a letter. It was a bill of sale, dated 2 years prior, for a parcel of timber rights on the north edge of the Ashmore land, signed in Edmund's name in a hand that was not Edmund's hand, witnessed by 2 names she did not recognize, and bearing the seal of a solicitor in a town 12 miles away. She said, that is forgery. Yes, she said, that is why you cannot simply dismiss him. Because he will produce that document and claim you authorized the sale and pocketed the proceeds, and without the ledgers and the dead steward's testimony, you cannot prove otherwise. Edmund looked at her over the candlelight. How long have you known there was a document? I suspected there was something of the kind, she said. The accounting alone would not have been enough to make a man feel safe. He needed something that could be used offensively, not only defensively. She considered the forged bill of sale with the professional attention she gave to any document. She said, his handwriting is very good, but he wrote your name in a slightly different weight than the rest of the text, because he was concentrating on the letter forms and lost the rhythm. Someone who studies handwriting closely would see it. Are you someone who studies handwriting closely? I spent 11 years copying documents for my uncle, she said. You begin to see how people move through letters. She set the candle down on the edge of the crate. We will need witnesses, not servants of this house, independent witnesses, people of standing who cannot be said to have loyalty to either side. We will need the solicitor whose seal is on that document present, because I suspect he did not actually witness the signing and will say so when asked directly, and we will need Cecily Vane." Edmund was quiet. "She needs to see it," Mira said, "not be told it. People who have been managed through documents must be shown the documents, or they will always wonder." He met her eyes. "If you want her to be free of him," she said more gently, "she must see it herself." He said, "And if she does not believe it even then you will have done what could be done," she said, "and that will have to be enough." A pause. Then, very quietly, he said, "You are remarkably steady for someone who was not told what she was walking into." She picked up the candle again. "I was raised in a house where no one told me anything," she said. "I learned to find things out myself. It seemed a more reliable system." She thought she heard, in the dark behind the candle's halo, the very first edge of what would become a laugh. She chose not to remark on it. But she noted it. The dark hour came, as it always does, from the direction you are not watching. She had been watchful, she had been careful, she had been systematic, and she had been right, and none of it saved her from the fact that Dorian Vane was also systematic, also careful, and had 15 more months of practice than she did in running this particular game. She discovered how badly she had misjudged her position when she returned from an errand to the village, a visit she had arranged openly, to call on the vicar's wife, which was unremarkable and therefore safe, and found, on her return, that the room in the bailiff's office was open. The crate was there. The ledgers were there. The handkerchief was there. The journal was there. The letter addressed to Edmund was there. Only the forged bill of sale was gone. She stood in the doorway with this information for exactly the time it took to understand it, which was not long. Then she went to find her husband. Edmund was in the library, and he was not alone. Dorian was with him, standing at the window with his hands in his pockets and his face arranged in the expression of a man who has recently been required to produce unpleasant news and has done so with appropriate reluctance. Cecily was seated across the room, and her face was closed in the way of someone who has recently received a blow she is not yet sure how to feel about. Lady Ashford. Dorian turned, and his smile was the particular smile of a man who holds the winning hand and is enjoying the moment before he plays it. "I am afraid the morning has brought some distressing revelations." She crossed the threshold and stood in the room without looking at Edmund, because she needed all of her attention for Dorian's face, and she said pleasantly, "What sort of revelations?" He reached into his coat. He drew out the forged bill of sale. He held it out, not to her, to Edmund, with the air of a physician delivering a diagnosis he hoped was wrong. "This was found this morning in the room off the bailiff's office, along with the late steward's journal, which contains, I am sorry to say, a record of certain financial decisions made during his tenure that I had not previously been aware of." He shook his head with perfect sorrow. "The bill of sale, as you will see, bears your seal and your signature, Edmund. I found it troubling. I felt I had to bring it to your attention." The room was very quiet. Mira looked at Edmund's face. He was still, in that way of his, but she saw in the set of his jaw that he understood what had happened. The document had been there all along, placed by Dorian in the room he had arranged to have locked, waiting for exactly this moment, when it would be produced as though discovered by accident and used to reframe everything the ledgers said. She had about 30 seconds before Edmund spoke, and she spent 20 of them looking at Dorian Vane's hands. He was holding the bill of sale very carefully. He was holding it by its edges, the way you hold something you want to seem careful with, but she noticed that his grip was slightly wrong, slightly more centered than it needed to be if he were simply protecting an old document. He was, she realized, holding it in a specific position. He was holding it so that one corner, the bottom left corner, was turned slightly away from the room. She said, "May I see it?" He looked at her. A fraction of a second's calculation, then the smile again. "Of course." She crossed the room and took the document. She did not look at the signature. She turned it to the light from the window, and she looked at the bottom left corner, which he had been holding turned away, and she saw what was there. It was very small. It was the kind of mark you make unconsciously, the way a man's hand will do a small familiar thing while the rest of him is thinking about something else. A line of figures, barely visible, penciled in the margin in the same habit she had seen in 7 years of Ashmore accounts. A running total, partial. The kind you make when you are calculating what a thing is worth, and then rub out. Except that this one had been incompletely rubbed, and the indentation remained. In Dorian Vane's hand, on the back of a document he had just claimed to have found this morning, she held the paper up to the window light. She said, without turning around, "Mr. Vane, when did you say this was found?" "This morning," he said, "after Lady Ashford left for the village." She said, "And you have not had it in your possession before this morning?" "No, of course not." She turned and held the paper out toward the window, angled so the light caught the embossed grain of the paper and the ghost of the penciled figures in the margin. She said, "This document has a margin notation in your handwriting on the reverse, partially erased. I can read enough of it to recognize the hand. It is the same as every quarterly summary you have filed for this estate for 6 years." She was quiet for one beat, keeping her voice very level. "Who copied the document into the second column of the September accounts for the year before last, Mr. Vane?" The smile did not leave his face. But something behind it changed. She said, "It is a small question, a copyist's question. You entered this document's amount into the September accounts yourself. I can see the entry, and the hand is yours, and the date makes it impossible for you to have entered it there in September if you did not hold this document in September." She held the paper out to Cecily, who had not moved or spoken. "The pencil indentation is his handwriting. You know his hand. You have known it all your life." Cecily looked at the paper. She looked for a long time. Her face was doing something complicated and private, and Mira looked away from it to give it room. The silence extended. Mira counted 12 seconds. Then Cecily said, in a voice that was very controlled, "Dorian, how long?" He said nothing. "How long?" she said again. He said, and his voice was still even, still pleasant, though it had lost its warmth the way a room loses warmth when the fire goes down. "You have no idea what it has cost me." 7 years in his service. 7 years of watching him waste what should have come to us, what would have come, if the entail had fallen differently. She turned her face away. 6 years. He adjusted the cravat again, and this time the gesture was not calculation. It was something raw, something she recognized now as what it had always been and she had read incorrectly. The movement of a man managing grief that had curdled into something else over a very long time. 6 years and some months. Edmund said, "Why Cecily? Why involve her at all?" A pause. "Because I needed her to trust me over you," he said, and the plainness of it was the most honest thing he had said in the room. "Because if she trusted you, she would have seen it herself eventually." She sees everything. Eventually, Cecily made a sound that was not quite any nameable thing and looked at her hands. Mira said, quietly, "There is a solicitor in Hartley whose seal appears on this document. I think we should send for him today. I think, if someone asks him plainly whether he witnessed this signing, he will find that he did not. Edmund looked at her. She held his gaze. He said, to no one in particular, I will send for Mr. Hargreaves as well, the county trustee. He is an honest man, she said, and the previous steward's daughter. She should be present. Her father's account should be read in full, before witnesses. He nodded. He said, and after? She said, after, we decide what happens to Mr. Vane in a manner that does not destroy his sister in the process. She looked at Dorian, who was standing very still now, the pleasantness gone from his face, and in its place something she had not expected, and would not soon forget. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been maintaining a very heavy structure for a very long time, and had just set it down. You will resign, she said. You will leave the county. You will not be prosecuted, because the prosecuting of you would require your sister to testify and would make your crimes a matter of public record in a way that would follow her name. She kept her voice matter of fact, as though she were discussing accounts. Edmund will provide you a letter of reference that says nothing false and nothing damning. This is not because you deserve it. It is because protecting the innocent is more important than punishing the guilty. Dorian looked at her for a long moment. She could not read his expression. He said, You are very generous for a woman I have given no cause to be. No, she said. I am practical. Those are different things. She heard, behind her, very quietly, the thing she had been tracking since the night she stood in the dark behind the gallery door. Edmund Ashford made a sound that was, unmistakably, almost a laugh. Not quite. The edge of one. She did not turn. She noted it carefully, the way she noted everything. The solicitor from Hartley arrived the following morning. He was a small, precise man who asked 3 questions and answered the third one himself before Mira had finished it. He had, he said, stamped the document in blank, as was his occasional practice for certain clients, and had not been present for the signing. His face, when he understood what the blank stamp had been used for, went through several stages of which remorse was the most visible. The county trustee, Mr. Hargreaves, who was tall and deliberate, and who looked at every document held before him as though he were reading a sermon, examined the ledgers and the journal and the letter from the dead steward for the better part of 3 hours at the library table, while the previous steward's daughter, a steady woman of 20, with her father's handwriting and her father's clear eyes, identified each volume and confirmed the entries her father had detailed. She wept once, briefly, when Edmund told her she would be compensated for her father's last years of silence. She thanked him with a composure that made the room very quiet. Dorian Vane was not present. He had gone before dawn, with a horse and a bag and the letter Edmund had written him, which said that he had served the Ashmore estate with diligence for 6 years and was leaving to pursue other opportunities, and which said nothing else. Cecily Vane sat in the chair by the east window throughout, and asked to read the dead steward's account herself, which she did, page by page, with her hands folded in her lap and her face held very still. When she had finished, she set it on the table and sat for a moment, and then she looked at Edmund and said, I owe you an apology that I do not know how to make large enough. Edmund said, You owe me nothing. You were shown a false account by someone you had every reason to trust. He paused. I should have spoken plainly to you 2 years ago instead of trying to shield you from the knowledge of what he was. I am sorry I didn't. Cecily was quiet for a moment. She said, That is very like you. She looked at Mira. And I owe you more than an apology. Mira said, You owe me nothing either. You tried to protect someone you loved. That is not a thing to apologize for. The room sat with this for a moment. Mr. Hargreaves cleared his throat and said that he would be filing his account of the proceedings with the appropriate offices, and that he was satisfied the documentation was conclusive, and that the matter of the forged sale could be set aside without further action, provided the document was destroyed, and all parties agreed it had never held any legal force. All parties agreed. Mira fed the forged bill of sale to the library fire herself and watched it burn with a sense of tidiness that she would not have called satisfaction exactly, but which was close. After the witnesses had gone, and after Cecily had embraced her with a warmth that was nothing like the painting and everything like the fire, and after the previous steward's daughter had been seen to a room for the night, because Mira had determined she would not travel back in the dark, Edmund and Mira were alone in the library, which was where they had begun, and the account books were spread across the desk in the long autumn light. He said, "It is done." She said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Michaelmas is in 5 days." She said, "I am aware." He said, "The settlement will stand without conditions now. The land transfers regardless." She heard what he was working toward, and she let him work toward it in his own time, because he had earned the right to take his time, and because she wanted to hear how he would say it. He said, "You have no material cause to remain." She looked at him. He was standing by the window in the last of the day's light, and his face was open in a way she had seen only in pieces until now, the careful reserve set aside the way you set aside a coat you have been wearing too long in warmth you did not expect. He said, "I am asking you to remain, because I am asking you. Not because of the settlement, not because it is convenient, not because you would be imprudent to leave." He paused, and she recognized in the pause the shape of someone handing back a line they had held for a long time. He said, "You told me on the first morning that you find things out yourself because it seemed the more reliable system." She said, "I did." He said, "I have found out several things." He met her eyes. "Most of them are about you." He let a beat pass. "Stay because you wish it. It is the only reason I will take." She looked at him for a long time. The light moved on the desk. Somewhere in the garden, a late thrush was working through its evening business with cheerful indifference to events in the library. She said, "You laughed this morning." He said, "I did." She said, "I had been waiting for it." A silence. Then he said, very quietly, "How long?" She said, "Since the second day." She straightened the top volume on the desk, corner to corner, a habit she could not seem to break even now. "You have a line that appears when something strikes you, and you will not permit it to become a laugh. I have been watching it since the second day." She looked up. "It is a very good line. I am glad it finally got out." He crossed the room. She did not move, because she had learned young that stillness was its own answer, and because she wanted him to cover the distance himself, and he did. He said, close enough now that she could see the specific quality of his attention, that alertness she had first named as recalibration, and now named as something else entirely. "I have been told I am difficult to know." She said, "Not particularly. You are only quiet. People mistake quiet for opacity." She considered. "You are one of the more legible people I have met, actually. You had already read the ledgers before I found the discrepancies. You sent me the tea. You put a second candle on the desk." He said, "Those are not remarkable things," she said. "They are if you have been in rooms where no one put a second candle on the desk." The line appeared at the corner of his mouth, and this time it made it all the way. She stayed. They were married again, properly, by which she meant in a way that she had chosen, in the small church at the village edge, on a morning in October when the air was cold and clear, and the trees in the churchyard had gone the color of old gold. There were 11 people in attendance, which was perfect. Mrs. Clary, who had been housekeeper at Ashmore for 30 years, and who had offered Mira a series of increasingly useful pieces of unsolicited advice since the first week, wept at the back in a way she would have denied under interrogation. Cecily Vane stood beside Mira and handed her a small sprig of rosemary, because it seemed right to both of them, and the vicar spoke the words in his deliberate country way, as though they were being said for the first time in the history of the world. The ledger of what happened afterward is short and honest. Cecily Vane went to stay with cousins in the north for the winter and came back in spring with a different quality of quiet, sadder than before but cleaner, the way air is cleaner after rain. And in the following year she married a widowed clergyman with 3 daughters and a garden and a very large dog, and she seemed, by every account Mira could gather, genuinely content, which was the only account that interested her. Mr. Hargreaves commended the management of the Ashmore estate in his annual report and named no names. The previous steward's daughter was appointed to keep the village school accounts at a salary Mira had proposed and Edmund had not argued with. The solicitor from Hartley retired early and spent his remaining years in a cottage near the sea, which Mira found just. Dorian Vane was not heard from for some time, and then was heard from at a distance, a position in a firm in Edinburgh, respectable. Not remarkable, the kind of life that fits over grief the way a coat fits over a wound, not healing it, but covering it, and keeping out the cold. Mrs. Clary's advice, delivered across the better part of a year in fragments, turned out to have been correct in nearly every particular, a fact which she did not draw attention to, and which everyone in the house understood. The thrush came back the following summer. Mira noticed, because she had begun to notice it in the autumn, its habit of finishing its evening song with a particular ascending phrase. She could not have named the notes, but she knew the shape of it the way you know a voice, and it was there again one July evening when she was sitting at the library desk with the new accounts. Edmund came in and set a cup of tea on the desk, without being asked, which he had done every evening since October, and she looked at it and then at him. She said, "I heard the thrush." He said, "I know. I heard it from the study." She said, "It came back." He looked at her with the full quality of his attention, which she no longer found alarming and no longer needed to look away from. She looked back. She said, "I owe you an account." She slid the open ledger toward him. The estate is in better order than it has been in a decade. The North timber rights are still unclaimed, which I believe is an opportunity, and the farmland from my uncle's settlement has yielded better than the previous figures suggested, because the previous figures were not honest. She paused. "I am very content with the system, overall." He looked at the ledger. He looked at her. He said, "I am also very content with the system." She said, "Good." She straightened the ledger and sat back. "You put a second candle on the desk again." He said, "It seemed the more reliable system." She did not laugh, exactly, but it was very close, and neither of them remarked on it, because some things do not need to be said aloud when they have already been proven in the light before witnesses and kept. If this story warmed you, if you felt, somewhere in the middle of it, the particular relief of watching someone overlooked be finally, fully seen, then you know why these stories are told by firelight. There is something in the slow uncovering of a hidden truth, in the moment when the paper is held up and the light comes through, that settles something in us we didn't know was unsettled. I'd love to know, what was the moment for you? The second candle on the desk? The ledger held to the window? The line he handed back to her at the end? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and those conversations are the best part of what we do here together. If you'd like to keep a seat by this fire, there are new stories every week, and subscribing is simply how you save your place. Until then, be patient with the ones who are quiet, be watchful for what is written in the margins, and sleep well.